Morning to you. Oh. Welcome to my first in-person accountability board. It's great to see you all in person. Thank you very much for coming. I'd like to welcome one new member, Councillor Mark Coxall, to the meeting, who is the Cabinet Member at Thurrock Council, who will be attending instead of Councillor Rob Gledhill. Councillor Bentley, who's the new leader at Essex County Council, is also new to the board, but unfortunately he's unable to attend this meeting, so he'll be represented by Councillor Leslie Wagland. Welcome to you both. Thank you very much. So if I could ask you to introduce yourselves. In order to use the mics, you just press the red button. You probably know this kind of thing better than I do. So if you could, we could go around this way and we could introduce ourselves. First of all, if you don't know me, I'm Sarah Dance. I'm chair of the Accountability Board.
I'm Helen Dyer, Capital Programme Manager at SELEP.
I'm Charlotte Moody. I'm solicitor for the accountable body.
I'm Leslie Wagland, and as Sarah said, I'm standing in for Councillor Kevin Bentley on this occasion. That's a great advantage because you will know the difference. All of those of you who know Kevin, there's a definite and distinct difference. Going beyond that, I am the Cabinet Member now for Economic Renewal, Infrastructure and Planning, and I'm also a planning lawyer by training, so you've got two lawyers down this side, so everyone will have to be very well behaved, it seems to me.
Thank you. Rodney Chambers, Medway Council.
You have to turn.
Oh, turn mine on.
Well, mine doesn't seem to working. It's probably working. Keith Glazier, leader of East Sussex County Council.
Roger Goff, leader, Kent County Council.
Ron Woodley, Deputy Leader of Southend-on-Sea Borough Council and responsible for everything the leader doesn't want to do.
Mark Coxall, Cabinet Member for Regeneration and Planning and External Relations for Thurrock Council.
Thank you very much. So if I could ask board members to please turn their mics off when they're not speaking, but turn them on obviously before you do speak. And if you wish to speak, please could you raise your hand so I can see you. Thank you very much. And when you're voting, please raise your hand physically. Members of the public can join today's meeting and officers are listening in to the discussion. So just be aware of that, please. And for those attending the meeting virtually, please don't use the chat function on the Zoom. If there are any technical issues with the virtual meeting, please just remain on the call and we'll try and resolve the issues as quickly as possible. I'm very glad to say that we have a wonderful technician with us here today who will sort it all out, hopefully. There is one item on today's agenda which includes a confidential discussion, and Suzanne will set out the process for that. Suzanne, quickly. Yeah.
Good morning all. So we have an item that's needs to be considered in confidential session. We've moved that item to the very end of the agenda. There is another appendix that has been issued to board members confidentially, but that won't be covered in discussion today. So it's just a single item. This item is highly confidential, so we will cease the Zoom recording at that time, and those people that are joining us on Zoom will no longer be able to be party to the discussions, but also ask any officers that are not necessary to be in the room will have to leave, and as will the technicians. It is an item that's being considered under duty of confidentiality, so if board members don't want to be party to the information that is going to be given at that point, then please do leave, because it's a personal liability under that duty.
Thank you, Suzanne. Okay, in terms of apologies, Helen, do we have some apologies?
Yes, as you've mentioned, we've got apologies from Councillor Bentley. We've also received apologies from Simon Cook.
Thank you. So let's move on to the minutes of the last meeting. can I see whether you believe that they are a correct record of the last meeting held on the 12th of March 2021? Yes, show your hands, please. Thank you. All right, thanks. And declarations of interest, please. They must be made in accordance with the Members' Code of Conduct. First of all, I'm just going to declare a couple of things. It should be noted that I have a small contract with Canterbury City Council at the moment on providing some creative and cultural advice on a possible bid to the Levelling Up Fund. And although it's not associated with anything in today's meeting, I just thought for true transparency, I should mention that as we do discuss Surrey Road, which is in that district. And then again, just for double transparency, I like to note that over 25 years ago, I worked for the Mercury Theatre in Colchester, and that is also mentioned on the agenda. I don't have any current links nor pecuniary interest with that organisation. Are there any other declarations of interest? No, thank you. So public questions, we have not had any public questions. So let's move on swiftly to item 5, which is a report to the board on the latest update revenue budget and provisional outturn and the updated 2021-22 budget. Lorna, I'm handing over to you on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. I'm hoping you can hear me okay. So my name is Lorna Norris. I work for Essex County Council in its role as supporting the accountable body role for SELEP. If you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen to give some slides to give some context around what we're discussing today. Okay, hopefully that's come up okay. So today's finance update concerns the provisional outturn position for 2021 and the updates for the 21-22 revenue budget. Firstly, starting with the provisional outturn position for 2021. So the table on this slide sets out the summary position for which the following should be noted. The overall position when comparing the total income to the total expenditure is a deficit position of 354,000 that's to be funded from reserves. This compares favourably to the budgeted position, which had an anticipated deficit of 727,000, giving a favourable movement of 232,000 from the position reported in February. As a reminder for the board, the key driver for the revenue deficit experienced in this financial year is related to the historic reliance on the external interest received on capital balances held on behalf of SELEP by the accountable body. In 1920, for example, 875,000 or 24% of total revenue spend was supported by external interest received, and a value in excess of 700,000 had been forecast for the 2020 original budget. Last July, however, it was necessary to agree an updated SELEP budget to include a significantly reduced external interest receipt due to the significant drop in interest rates experienced since the outset of the COVID pandemic in February 20. To address the resultant budget gap, the board agreed to fund part of the reduction from reserves, with the remaining through other planned expenditure reductions. In the end, interest receipts were higher than the revised budget by 155,000, which represents the majority of the favourable movement against budget and forecast shown in the table. But overall, this value is much lower than had been in recent years. A further key change in 2021 was the decision by the board to repurpose funding from the Growing Places Fund programme to implement measures to support the COVID recovery. Two of these measures relate to the establishment of the business support and skills recovery programmes. A total of 4.4 million was ring-fenced for these schemes, of which only a small amount has been expended in 2021, whilst the planning and procurement activity was undertaken, with the remainder committed against delivery in 21-22. Two ring-fenced reserves are proposed to be established to appropriately account for the funds in 2021. This funding is then requested to be drawn down in the current year to support delivery of the respective programmes. This slide sets out the overall reserves position at the end of the last financial year. The withdrawal to support the revenue budget leaves a closing balance of operational reserves of 972,000. This is 373,000 higher than the budgeted position as referenced on the previous slide. For the board's awareness, the external audit of the accounts is due to commence in July, with an expectation that these can then be considered by the board in September. Moving on now to consider the position for 21-22. The budget originally agreed in November 20, but at that point it was not possible to reflect all the specific grants that they'd not been confirmed by the respective awarding bodies. A revised budget is therefore proposed to incorporate the grants and their associated expenditure. The proposed budget also reflects a slight reduction to the planned contributions to reserves of 19,000. This is due to a higher than anticipated use of grant funding in 2021, which enabled a reduced drawdown from reserves in that year. So the net impact of these adjustments on reserves balances across both the years is zero. This budget does assume that the core funding that we normally receive from government of £500,000 will be received. This funding in previous years has been made available at the start of the financial year, but it has yet to be received this year. But we have understand that verbal assurances have been given to the Secretariat that this is just an administrative delay, and there's still an expectation this funding will be delivered. If, however, it does not become available, there'll be a need to urgently review the revenue budget again for this financial year to address the funding gap that will arise because of that. So we're continuing to work with the Secretariat to seek clarification in that respect. Also, for this budget, there's no allowance assumed in relation to any form of interest receipts. This is considered prudent as interest rates remain very low and the capital balances are much lower than they have been in previous years. This is due to all the Getting Building Fund and the majority of the remaining Local Growth Fund being paid out to partners at the end of 2021, with the further 2021 Getting Building Fund allocation not received until mid-May, with payments already transferred where claims have been made. But we're continuing to work with the Essex County Council Treasury Management Team to review the forecast, and we'll provide a further update at the next finance update that's made to the board. So just in this final slide, this sets out the anticipated reserves position for 2021 at the end of the year. This suggests that just over £1 million of operational reserves will be left to support future years' budgets. This then reduces to 740,000 when you take into account the need to maintain the minimum value of reserves of 260,000. As has been discussed in previous meetings, this reserves position places at risk the ongoing activities of SELEP if the ongoing grants or contributions that we currently expect to receive cannot be assured. So in summary, whilst we consider the current year budget position to be robust, there continue to be risks that remain under review, and these risks are exacerbated by the uncertainties in relation to the future role of LEPs being considered as part of the latest LEP review. One of the key risks remains the approach by government to allocate funding on an annual basis. This builds in inherent risk and additional costs to delivery for SELEP and its partners. This concern has been raised with government on several occasions, but they've yet to provide any certainty or stability of future funding arrangements. The LEP review that's underway, however, is considering the future funding of LEPs and provides government with a further opportunity to provide a longer term solution. I'll leave it there, but if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you very much, Lorna. Questions or comments from the board? Do I have any? No. Councillor Gazier.
Chairman, I think the explanation given is very clear. I think the uncertainty around future funding is there for all of us. I think that the work that's been done leaves us in a very good place. We just need to hope that government eventually are in a position to provide full more than 1 year funding.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. And I'd also like to pay tribute to the staff team who've worked so hard actually to reduce the revenue deficit position, which was predicted originally to be around the 727,000 to the 324,000, I think it is. So well done to the team. Actually, that's a very good investment. Thank you, Lorna. Thank you, Suzanne, for all your work on that. Councillor Chambers.
Thank you, Chairman. This actually emphasises that the government has got to get its act together as far as the review is concerned. Those of us who sat at the board meeting, the SELEP board meeting last week, it was a meeting of uncertainties in many areas. And here we've got another issue with so many unknowns and uncertainties. And it really stems from the fact that the unknowns are the unknowns of what the government is going to really come forward with as far as the SELEP review. And I think the message that must go out, that they've got to get that act together. It's one thing to announce there's a review. It's another thing to know exactly how you're going to undertake that review. And I think there's a degree of urgency behind that.
Thank you, Councillor Chambers. I absolutely agree. And we will continue to press via Chris, Brodie, all of that message. Councillor Wagland.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. And I would entirely agree with that. But I think it would be useful to ask the additional point, which is whether or not this is one of those items which is being queue jumped by other more important things, in inverted commas, or whether it's an item which is actually taking longer to deal with. And I'm finding that asking that question sometimes it gets some more interesting answers. But it seems to me that it's really important to know which of those categories this has fallen into in circumstances where there is a pandemic and there are emergency measures, obviously, that will be taking up people's time. But this is a really important element of the infrastructure piece. And if we don't have the relevant certainties, and nobody's expecting absolute certainty, we've worked without that for a long time, but just that some of the certainties, then it is making everything else look a little bit like a domino set. And I think it's really important that we understand what it is that needs to be done before this review is going to actually be available in a format which will enable us to work effectively and sensibly.
Thank you. As you know, the SELEP network is working hard on this matter at the moment and continuing to push. I think it's true to say that there are other pressures that have come to bear on the timing of all of this, but we will continue to push for a positive outcome in terms of what we deliver for the people and the communities of the South East. Councillor Woodley.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think we probably need to take a very jaundiced look going through this year. And I'm not talking about reduction of staff, but any of the other costs that we can look at and reduce, any expenditure like that. And because we know we've got a really slimmed down secretariat, they do extremely well for us, and we do need to protect them as long as possible until we do get, as Councillor Glazier said, the financial support from the government. So maybe we need to have a brief update every meeting to see where we are and what position we're in, and to what savings that have been made if we do need to make sure that we don't get any surprises towards the end of the year. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Woodley. Lorna, Suzanne, would that be feasible, possible to organise?
Yeah, I mean, we would normally try to give an update at each meeting anyway on the latest forecast position. So yeah, I don't see any problem with that.
Brilliant, thank you. All right, so if everybody is happy, I'd like to ask whether you approve the provisional outturn for the South East SELEP revenue budget for 2020-21 in table 1 in your papers. Can I see your hands if you do agree? Thank you. Approve the contribution of 354,000 from general reserves in table 1. Thank you. Approve the establishment of a ring-fenced reserve for the COVID-19 Skills Support Fund and to contribute 2.096 million balance of this fund to the reserve in 2020-21, and then approve the subsequent drawdown of this funding to be applied in 21-22 to deliver the initiative. Thank you. Approve the establishment of a ring-fence reserved for COVID-19 Business Support Fund and to contribute the 2.396 million balance of this fund to the reserves in 2020-21, and then approve the subsequent drawdown of this funding to be applied in 21-22 to deliver this initiative. Thank you. Approve the proposed 2021-22 latest SELEP revenue budget set out in table 6 in your papers, including the specific grants summarised in table 7 and detailed in appendix 1. Thank you. And note, as we all indeed have done, the ongoing uncertainties regarding the future funding position for SELEP, particularly in light of the LEP review and indications from government that no new capital monies will be made available through the LEPs. Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on now then to item 6, which is the Local Growth Fund update. Helen, I'm handing over to you.
Thank you. So as usual, this report provides an update on the overall position of the Local Growth Fund programme. It primarily focuses on the provisional outturn position for 2020-21 and the year-end position which was reported to government. The board are also asked to consider the new construction centre at Chelmsford College project, which is seeking approval for LGF spend beyond the 30th of September 2021. The report shows that LGF spend totaling 37.483 million has been reported for 2020-21, excluding DFT retained schemes, rising to 60.733 million when these schemes are included. This spend reflects 47.2% of the total LGF planned spend at the start of the 2020-21 financial year. Based on these figures, 106.8 million LGF, including DFT retained schemes, remains unspent as at the 31st of March 2021. 86.6 million of this LGF is forecast to be spent in 21-22. As the board are aware, SELEP was required to provide confirmation to government that all the LGF funding would be contractually committed and spent by the 31st of March 2021 in order to secure receipt of the final tranche of the LGF funding. In reality, it wasn't possible to spend the full remaining balance on approved projects during 2020-21, and therefore the board agreed that SELEP should use the freedoms and flexibilities afforded by government to transfer the unspent LGF funding to local authorities' own capital programmes prior to the end of the last financial year. This funding was to be either invested in local capital programme as an option 4 swap, or held by the local authorities a ring-fenced capital grant. This approach is in accordance with the SELEP assurance framework and the service level agreements entered into with the upper tier local authorities. In March 2021, in accordance with the decisions taken by the board, the remaining unspent LGF funding was transferred to local partners. The only funding still held by the accountable body at the end of 2021, as reported to government, was the remaining balance of 4.656 million against the A28 Surrey Link Road project and £490,000, which was identified during the reconciliation of the LGF budget, which due to accounting error resulted in Essex County Council not drawing down this funding during the growth deal period. This funding will be drawn down in Q2 21-22. The report also sets out a request from the new construction centre at Chelmsford College project to allow LGF spend beyond the 30th of September. The project has demonstrated that it meets the conditions previously agreed by the board for extended spend of LGF funding. The project is now expected to complete in February 2022. It directly links to the provision of improved skills levels in the SELEP area. All required funding sources have been secured and a construction contractor has been appointed. If the board agree to support this request, the strategic board endorsement will be sought via electronic procedure during the coming weeks. Finally, the report contains the usual deliverability and risk update for all LGF projects and provides an update on the 4 high-risk projects which aren't covered elsewhere within the agenda. It should be noted that the M2 Junction 5 improvements have now been approved by the Secretary of State for Transport, contrary to the information provided in the update. A full update on the project, including delivery timescales, will be presented to the board in September. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you, Helen. Comments or questions? Firstly, I should just note that we're delighted that Rosemary has been able to join us to this meeting. Rosemary, if you could just introduce yourself so anybody watching knows. If you need to press the red button on the mic.
Rosemary Nunn, University of Greenwich. Apologies for being late. Thank you.
Welcome. Right, thank you. So any questions or comments from the board, please, to Helen? None? Marvellous. Okay, thank you. Let's go straight to, can we note the provisional total spend in 2021 of 37.483 million LGF, excluding the Department for Transport retained schemes, and 60.733 million, including DFT retained schemes, as set out in Table 1. Can we note the LGF position reported to government in May 2021 following the implementation of the capital transfer previously agreed by the board as set out in Table 3? And that do we agree the total planned LGF spend in 2021-22 of 69.863 million, excluding the DFT retained schemes, and increasing to 86.577 million, including the DFT retained schemes, as set out in Table 2 and Appendix A? Thank you. Note the deliverability and risk assessment as set out in Appendix D, and agree the spend of LGF beyond 30th of September 2021 and the revised completion date for the new construction centre at Chelmsford College project as set out in section 5 of this report, subject to strategic board endorsement via electronic procedure following this board meeting. Do you agree that? Great, thank you. Okay, thanks very much. Let's move on now to item 7, which is the Local Growth Fund update on the fulfilment of funding conditions. Helen, I'm handing over to you again on that. Thank you.
Thank you. As the board will remember, it was agreed that conditions should be attached to the transfer of the remaining unspent LGF funding allocated to higher risk projects at the end of 2020-21. This report provides an update on 2 of those projects, which have now demonstrated that they've met the conditions attached to the transfer of the funding. The first project is Bewley Park Station, which is in receipt of £12 million of LGF funding. Essex County Council have been successful in securing £123 million from the Housing Infrastructure Fund to support delivery of the station. However, in February 2021, the board were made aware of delays in the signing of the HIF grant determination agreement. Accordingly, the board agreed that the full £12 million of the LGF should be transferred to Essex County Council prior to the end of 2021, on the condition that the funding would be returned to SELEP for reallocation if the grant determination agreement was not signed by the 30th of June. Following approval by Essex County Council Cabinet in March 2021, the HIF determination agreement was completed. As the full funding package for the project is now in place, the project can proceed to delivery in accordance with the HIF delivery timescales. As previously agreed by the board, the LGF funding will be spent in 2025-26 at the end of the delivery programme. It is expected that the new station will open in December 2025, not late 2026, as stated in the report. There remain a number of risks which will continue to be monitored and managed during project delivery, and as a result, the board will continue to receive updates on the project. The second project referenced in the report is the Bexhill Enterprise Park North project, which is in receipt of 1.94 million LGF. As the board are aware, the reserved matters planning application was refused by the local planning authority in October 2019. An appeal was submitted to the planning inspectorate in December 2019. However, due to COVID-19 related delays, the outcome of this appeal was not known at the time of the March board meeting. The board therefore agreed that the 1.5 million LGF still held by the accountable body should be transferred to East Sussex County Council as a ring-fence grant prior to the end of 2020-21. On the condition that the full 1.94 million LGF allocation would be returned to SELEP for reallocation within 4 weeks of notice of an unsuccessful planning appeal, or by the 1st of September if planning consent was not in place by that point. The Planning Inspectorate issued their decision on the 1st of April 2021, and all elements of the appeal were allowed. As a result, planning permission is now in place for both the LGF funded enabling works and the employment workspace, which will be brought forward on the site. Work continued on the development of the project whilst the outcome of the planning appeal was awaited, and it is therefore expected that the enabling works will be complete before the end of September 2021. Construction of the employment workspace, which is required to deliver the jobs benefits set out within the project business case, is expected to commence in autumn 2021. A further update on the project will be provided to the board in September.
Thank you, Helen. Any comments or queries from the board, please? No, Councillor Glazier.
Just to say, I think it's again a very clear definition of what's gone on and the reasons behind some of these. So I'm pleased that we got the report before us this morning.
Thank you, Councillor Glazier. Okay, unless there are any other comments, let's move to note that the Housing Infrastructure Fund grant termination agreement in relation to Bewley Park Station has now been signed, fulfilling the LGF funding conditions attached to the project. Notes that the planning permission has now been granted for the Bexhill Enterprise Park North project, which satisfies the LGF funding conditions attached to the project. And note that both projects will now proceed to delivery as set out within this report. Thank you. So let's move on now to item 8, which is the LGF high risk projects update. I'm handing over to Helen first, and then I believe you're handing over to other people. Thank you.
Thank you. So this report provides an interim update on 3 high risk LGF projects. A full detailed update on each project, which considers the next steps with regard to the LGF funding awarded, will be presented to the board in September 2021. The first project referenced within the report is the A28 Surrey Link Road. As the board will recall, an update on the project was provided in March 2021. This update indicated that whilst a formal decision notice was yet to be issued, the indications were that the Kent County Council Planning Committee had narrowly chosen to refuse the planning application for the Link Road. The board agreed that the project should be given more time to understand and address the reasons for planning refusal and agree that planning consent must now be in place by the 1st of September. Following the March board meeting, a formal decision notice was issued which indicated that planning permission had been refused. A revised planning application with minor clarifications to address the grounds for refusal is expected to be considered by planning committee in July. An update on the outcome of this planning application will be provided at the September board meeting alongside next steps for the project and an update on the land acquisition risks outlined within the report. At this meeting, the board are asked to agree that the total 5.9 million LGF allocation should be retained against the project until the 1st of September 2021, when the outcome of the planning appeal will be known. This decision is required to ensure that a full audit trail is in place, allowing the retention of the funding against the project until September. The decision taken by the board in March to agree an extension until the 1st of September was not linked to the retention of the funding against the project, and therefore this audit trail does not currently exist. To be clear, there is no recommendation that the funding is reallocated away from the project at this meeting. This will be considered in September, depending on the outcome of the planning application. I will now pass over to Richard Dawson, who is going to talk about the Queensway Gateway Road project.
Richard, are you there? Thank you.
Sorry, Sarah, I was just trying to unmute and get the camera on. Okay. Good morning, board members. Thank you for letting me present this report. Firstly, I would like to say from the outset that across all parties, including Sea Change as a delivery agent, that a lot of resource and time is being taken to drive forward this project and constructively address any blockages. This report demonstrates several positive steps made since the last meeting's update. As the board will be aware, the Queensway Gateway Road will unlock over 12,000 square metres of designated employment sites within the Bexhill Hastings Growth Corridor, which would otherwise not be brought forward. £10 million of local growth fund monies was allocated to the project, with a further £2 million coming from the scheme promoter to Sea Change Sussex. Whilst 3/4 of the scheme has been delivered, the final section has been delayed due to the need for Sea Change Sussex to acquire some of the land. I'm going to talk about the temporary connection and the permanent connection now. So firstly, the temporary connection. In light of these delays, Sea Change Sussex have been progressing a temporary connection to the A21. This will enable vehicles to use the road for access to the A21 as an interim solution until the permanent connection can be delivered. The temporary connection, which will realise the employment benefits of the scheme, involves the introduction of traffic lights at the junction between A21 and Junction Road. Since the last update to the board, Highways England have provided an in-principle technical approval that the scheme would not have a wider detrimental impact on the strategic and local road networks, which is a positive sign. Once Highways England has completed and approved the current road safety audit, Sea Change Sussex will be able to carry out the more detailed design of the temporary scheme. This will then be submitted clearly to Highways England and the County Council for technical approval. As part of the temporary connection, a permanent traffic regulation order will also need to be advertised and brought into effect to close off the Junction Road to vehicular traffic. The normal timescale for processing a permanent TRO can be between 6 to 12 months. Sea Change Sussex have undertaken some initial conversations and consultation with statutory bodies and transport bodies, such as the emergency services and transport operators. And I can confirm today that East Sussex County Council has initiated the formal TRO process with Sea Change Sussex, which is another positive step. As such, the next stages are for the orders to be drafted around 6 weeks and ahead of the 21-day advertisement periods, where this is the opportunity to comment on the proposed road closure. If there are any unresolved objections to the advertised TRO, these will need to be reported and considered by the County Council's Planning Committee. And we will of course be working with Sea Change Sussex to reduce the time frame for completion of the TRO as much as we possibly can. In addition, legal agreements to undertake works on highways will be required, and these cannot be sealed until the scheme detailed design and technical approval has been given by Highways England and the County Council. But I can assure the board that already draft agreements have been prepared for the relevant Section 6 and Section 278 agreements. Moving on to the permanent connection, the final element of the permanent connection is the proposed construction of the roundabout on the A21. As highlighted in previous board updates, this is dependent upon completion of ongoing land acquisition processes. The County Council have indicated that their preferred scenario would be for Sea Change Sussex to secure all the necessary land through negotiation from all of the relevant landowners. However, if the land cannot be secured through a negotiation and a compulsory purchase order process is deemed necessary, or an alternative option is identified, then the construction start and completion could be delayed further by anywhere between 6 to 18 months. The County Council are in the process of procuring an independent expert in relation to whether there is a case for CPO to undertake an assessment of all the options available to facilitate the completion of the Queensway Gateway Road. The intention is that this work will be provided and undertaken before September 21. So as highlighted in the report, a further update will be brought to the SELEP Accountability Board on the further developments and speed at which we're going at to bring this project to life. Can I hand back to you, Sarah, or to Helen?
Thank you,
Any
Richard.
questions should they arise?
Thank you, Richard. We'll come to that when we've gone through all of the items, if we may, and take questions then. So if you can stay on the line, I'm going to hand over now to Howard, who's going to talk about the London Gateway, Stamford-le Hope.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everyone. The purpose of this section of the report is to provide an update to the Accountability Board on the delivery of the London Gateway Stamford-le Hope project, which has been raised to high-risk status. The project was allocated £7.5 million of LGF in February 2017, which has been fully spent on design and demolition works. The project aims to ensure that high-quality accessibility is provided by non-car means through better bus facilities in Stamford-le Hope and a high-quality rail bus integration to attract employees by delivering a new station building complete with facilities, level access to platforms and station buildings, real-time customer information, and a new multimodal interchange with car drop-off positions, taxi rank, cycle parking and bus shelters. The project has been raised to high risk due to slow progress and issues around the scope of the project. Earlier this year, Thurrock Planning Committee deferred the determination of the planning application for phase 1, the station upgrade, until more details on phase 2, the multimodal interchange, were available. Further work has been undertaken with planning officers, and it is hoped that the planning committee will review the application at their meeting on the 15th of July. As this project is now considered to be high risk, the board will receive regular updates on progress towards delivery. To this end, it is recommended that a full update is presented to this board in September, which gives the latest status on A, the planning position, B, delivery programme, C, confirmation that a full funding package is in place to deliver the project, and finally, D, an update on the progress of the new engineering contract, NEC agreement, which will be put in place between Thurrock Council and their delivery partners once appointed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Howard. Okay, right, questions and comments from the board on all of those items, please. Councillor Gough.
Thank you, Chair. Unsurprisingly, my remarks relate to Starry. Couple of points. Firstly, welcome Helen's point that the fact that we have this here for a form of decision is for auditing purposes, because clearly I think the spirit of what we were seeking to do in March was to say it was there was no further decision making until September. But if that's clearly for auditing purposes, that is fine. We do need to make one slight amendment to what is proposed, because I was informed late yesterday that the Planning Applications Committee meeting, which will, and it will consider only this item, will now actually take place on the 2nd of September. So the reason for this is that clearly we, like others, had elections in May. We have a substantially new or significantly new planning committee. And the date that was originally considered, which would have been for this meeting, which was the 14th of this month, is in fact being used for a site visit for those committee members, particularly the new ones, to be able to see it and make a particularly well-informed decision. So on that basis, clearly we would seek, or we could ensure that as soon as the Planning Application Committee has made its judgment, then that information can be conveyed to SELEP straight away and in time for the papers for the meeting on the 10th. So I appreciate that's slightly awkward in the fact that we had a drop dead date mentioned there of the 1st of September. But as I say, that is the delay we now have to the Planning Committee, but it is clearly set for that time. It will be, as I say, a single item agenda. So I would be grateful if we could amend what is recommended to take that into account, and then to be able to, the board can then make its proper judgment, which in a sense will be a very binary one, I think, because the Planning Committee will either go one way or the other.
Thank you, Councillor Gough. Councillor Coxon.
Yes, it'd be no surprise that I'll be talking, just to mention to the members here about the Stamford Hope London Gateway Junction. Again, it's a planning committee. It is the planning committee, just to give you a bit more substance, was held during the local elections here, which was a very difficult to have a planning of this importance coming forward to a local election, and it was deferred by the chair on recommendations. And on the 15th, there is again a new planning committee in the borough, and I hope that the 15th that they'll give due consideration and determine an early expedience. So that would be a much better report coming back in September if we get determination, and likewise if it isn't, then obviously we'll have to come to here with a better, different report. But I'm hoping that this will be noted and come back in September.
Thank you, Councillor Goxall. Councillor Glazier.
Just on the Queensway Gateway, which is a regular item here. I hope that the report that Richard gave some confidence that we are moving forward on this programme, and we've received another report from Sea Change Sussex that we are currently looking at, and I'm confident that by the September board, we will have a solution based on what recommendation were made earlier.
Thank you, Councillor Gazer. Councillor Wagland.
Yes, I appreciate that it ought to be a binary decision, but of course there is a possibility of a deferral, and I just wondered, I imagine that it would be useful to probably to record in this meeting that queries on the part of the membership fully understand absolutely the position they find themselves in of the planning committee would be good to be ironed out along the way, so that this is more likely to be binary. I think nothing improper in that in relation to a planning process. It seems to me to be a proper and advancing approach to it.
Thank you, Councillor Wagland. Councillor Gazer.
Sorry, can I come back? I forgot to comment on Councillor Goff's dilemma, if you like, of the first and second. I don't think it's beyond our wit to bring a report to the 1st of September that would say subject to the 2nd, and so I therefore would support that we give as much leeway as we can.
Thank you, Councillor Gazer. The actual Accountability Board meeting isn't until the 10th of September, so that does actually give us leeway, and we could look to change the matter you're voting on, whether you agree that it actually says at the moment the 1st of September in your papers. We could move that to the 10th of September, and I would suggest that we might look to do that in the recommendations when we come to vote on it. Thank Councillor Goff.
I'm happy to ask for guidance as to what the best way to approach this is. I mean, clearly papers will need to be prepared for the meeting on the 10th. So whether we said the 3rd, or indeed last time I looked, I do believe there are telephones between Kent and Essex. And therefore it would be quite possible that we could, once we have the result of the planning committee, that we can convey that to SELEP. So even on the day, so whatever is best in terms of SELEP processes, I'm happy to go with that as the suggested drop dead date, which I think 1st of September was largely there as a sort of convenient number rather than necessarily tied particularly to the meeting acceptance, since it was quite close to the 10th, if you see what I mean.
Thank you. Suzanne. Yeah.
So to set out the processes, we will need to circulate the papers a week in advance, and what I didn't want to do was to try and put a deadline on you that might come before any call-in process. I'm not sure what your call-in procedures are for that planning committee. So the suggestion was then, if we will obviously have conversations with your officers through that time between the 2nd and the 10th, we will update papers wherever we can, but if things are still outstanding, then a verbal update can be given on the day, which is why we suggested that perhaps we have that accountability board date as that final drop dead date. Does that sound sensible to?
I'm very content with that, thank you.
Also, can I just check you're happy, our legal representative is happy with that?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, I think we might have been having some technical problems, so if you dropped out, our apologies for that. Oh, that's all right. It was just only the projection room. Okay, sorry. Right. Okay. Thank you. Just to be clear, it was just our end that we were having technical issues, so that's fine. Okay. So unless there aren't any other queries or comments, so regarding the A28 Surrey Link Road, I'd like us to note the update on the project. Do we agree that the total 5.9 million LGF allocation should be retained against the project until the 10th of September 2021, when the outcome of the planning process will be known, noting that if this is not agreed, that the unspent LGF balance of 135,000 currently held by Kent County Council must be returned to Essex County Council as the accountable body within 4 weeks of this meeting for reallocation to the next project on the LGF pipeline, alongside the remaining 4.656 million LGF allocation still held by the accountable body. Do you agree to that? Thank you. On London Gateway, Stanford La Hope, do we, oh sorry, on the Sturry Link Road still. Note that a further update will be brought to the September board meeting, which will set out the outcome of the planning process and the next steps for the project, subject to the board agreeing the recommendation. Yes, so do we? No. Queensway Gateway Road. Note the update on the project, the further delay to the delivery of the temporary connection and the steps which need to be undertaken to secure completion of the project. And note that a further update will be provided to the board in September 2021, which sets out a clear delivery plan and associated milestones. Thank you. And Gateway Stanford, London Gateway Stanford La Hope. Note that the update on the project and the risks identified, and agree that a further update will be brought to the board in September 2021, which sets out a clear delivery plan with associated milestones and confirms that a full funding package is in place. Do we agree with that? Thank you. Okay, let's move on to item 9, which is the A26 Tunbridge Wells Cycle and Junction Improvements Package. Project change request. Helen, I'm handing over to you on that.
Thank you. So as Sarah said, this report asks the board to consider a request to change the scope of the A26 Tunbridge Wells Junction and Cycle Improvements Package. The project has been awarded a total of £1.8 million LGF. As set out within the report, the project was originally designed to deliver junction improvements on the A26. However, the scope was subsequently expanded to also include cycle improvements. The junction improvements element has been fully delivered and is not impacted by this proposed change of scope. The board considered the cycle improvements business case in September 2017, at which point it was stated that the improvements will be delivered in 3 phases. To date, only one of these phases has been delivered. Following the release of new DFT guidance for local authorities on designing high-quality, safe cycle infrastructure, it is no longer possible for all 3 phases of the project to be delivered within the available budget, and therefore alternative options have been considered. The project change request proposes that the cycle improvements element is reduced from 3 phases to 2, with the second phase being delivered in accordance with the updated DFT guidance. Under this change request, one section of the A26 between Tunbridge Wells and Tunbridge will not receive improved cycle infrastructure at this time. The proposed works will build on the work undertaken in the first phase and will deliver further enhancements to the route for pedestrians and cyclists. In addition, the delivery of these works will respond to the aims set out in recent transport policy relating to the decarbonisation of the transport network through facilitating active travel, and are in line with the original project objectives. It is stated in the change request that sufficient funding has been secured to support delivery of the reduced project scope, and based on the indicative programme provided, it is expected that the works will be complete by September 2022. It should be noted that the development of the revised scope of works is at an early stage, which inherently means that there is a greater level of risk and uncertainty associated with the project, as outlined in the report. So there are 2 options available to the board today. Option 1 agrees the retention of the LGF funding against the project until the September 2021 board meeting, during which an updated business case, which demonstrates that the project continues to offer high value for money, will need to be presented to the board. The proposed works remain in line with those set out in the business case and continue to support the same objectives. Potential funding options for the missing phase of the project have been identified, which may ultimately support full delivery of the project. As mentioned, there are risks associated with the proposed change in scope, and it is clear from the indicative programme provided that LGF spend will need to extend beyond the 30th of September 2021. It is apparent from the information provided that the construction contractor will not be in place by the end of September, and therefore the project will be unable to demonstrate compliance with all the conditions previously agreed by the board for the extended spend of LGF. Should the board agree option 1, any decision to allow extended LGF spend taken in September 2021 would need to be made on an exception basis. The second option agrees not to implement the proposed change in project scope and requires County Council to repay the remaining unspent LGF totalling £623,389, so that the funding can be reallocated to alternative projects on the pipeline. The board are also asked to consider if there is compelling justification not to recover the 1.177 million LGF already spent supporting delivery of the project. This option is available to the board should they consider that the risks outlined in the report outweigh the potential benefits offered by the delivery of the revised project scope. As indicated, spend of the LGF funding will extend beyond the 30th of September, and the project does not meet the conditions previously agreed by the board. Therefore, you may wish to consider whether there can be any flexibility with regard to these conditions, given the short construction programme for the project, or if the funding should be returned as this condition cannot be met. If the funding is removed from the project, it will be reallocated under agenda item 12 today. However, the funding allocations will not be confirmed until the funding has been returned to Essex County Council as accountable body by Kent County Council. Further information on the business case history, including value for money and project delivery to date, is provided to support board's consideration as to whether there is justification to not recover the LGF already spent on the delivery of the project.
Thank you, Helen. Are there any comments, queries from the board, please? Councillor Goff.
Merely to note that I think some of the key sections as are set out in section 6, particularly 6.2, where you've got the description there of the modified phase 3, which is what would now be taken forward. And I think it would be very justifiable to come back to the board with, as is suggested in option 1, detail of that and how that can be delivered as the way forward.
Thank you, Councillor Goff. Any other comments or queries? Councillor Wagner.
Yes, Essex Council thinks that this has very deal of sense about it. We're pleased that it's been revisited in light of DOT guidance, and that's the aims and objectives and consistent with the funds that we ourselves have in our own transport studies. And obviously, there's a significant increase in scope. Best practice in having cycle rates and ability to need greater uptake seems to be the critical factor. So we might be supportive of option 1.
Thank you, Councillor Wagland. Councillor Coxall.
Yeah. I'm in support of option 1. I just wanted some advice on, obviously it's come late to this, to here, and how HMG will feel that that is an opinion that it's so late in the day to actually decide this, and it may well be that it was DFT's changing opinions. That's one government department talking to another, and how does that affect us? And is there a clawback against the board itself as we're going past the 30th of September at this late stage?
Helen, can I ask for your advice on that? Thank you.
There is no clause within the grant determination provided by government that allows them any scope to claim funding back from SELEP if it is not delivered by the 31st of March, which was the original end of the growth deal period. As has previously been agreed by the board, funding has been transferred for projects which have not yet spent the LGF funding. This funding has already been transferred to Kent County Council and has been reported to government as such.
Thank you. So is everybody clear on everything? So we will vote first on option 1, and then obviously if that passes, we'll look at option 2. So do you agree that to retain the 1.8 million LGF allocation against the Tunbridge Wells A26 cycle and junction improvements packages until the 10th of September 2021? It's unanimous. And agree that an updated business case which demonstrates that the revised scope of the Tunbridge Wells A26 cycle and junction improvements package offers high value for money and should be presented to the board on the 10th of September 2021, along with evidence as to how the project meets the conditions for spend beyond 30th of September 2021. Thank you. So we won't need to look at option 2. Okay, let's move on now swiftly to item 10, which is the A13 widening project update. Howard, I'm handing over to you on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As has been the case at recent meetings, the purpose of this report is to provide an update to the board on the delivery of the A13 widening project. This report provides the updated position of the project and provides an update on the outcome of the contract negotiations which have been undertaken by Thurrock Council. That's where I'm going to stop. We do have Colin Black from Thurrock on the line, who may want to add a little bit to that, and we'll take questions. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. Just to really add to that, I was out on site with the construction design team last week. I'm pleased to confirm that things are progressing to time, to budget, and looks like it's on the schedule as per programme. We are, I suppose, key risks on the projects are really, as usual, trying to pin down utilities companies to a clear date on when they're going to provide necessary diversions, etc. But the team are all confident that we're working well to deliver to programme. Happy to answer any further more specific questions if required.
Thank you. Okay, any queries or comments from the board, please? Councillor Woodley.
Just a comment, Chair, to say that I drove through those roadworks this morning on the way here, and it certainly has improved tremendously over the last time I drove through. And hopefully you're not going to close the road tomorrow, because I've got to take my wife into London to get a haircut. So hopefully I can drive through nice and smoothly. But I welcome this report, and I think Thurrock should be congratulated on the scope of the work and what they've done. Yeah, really looking forward to being completed.
Thank you. Councillor Wagland.
Yes, we're really pleased that there's been some significant progress, and we're going to continue to support anything that will get the project completed. And certainly this work impacts our network with significant movements from traffic diverting and finding alternative routes. So we were very glad to see the paper and look forward to further progress of the same vein.
Thank you, Councillor Wagland. All right, thank you very much. So I'd like us to note the update on the delivery of the project, and note that a further update on the project delivery will be provided at the September 2021 board meeting. Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on to item 11, which is, I think, a really important item about the Local Growth Fund Lessons Learnt report. Howard, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to summarise the draft Local Growth Fund Lessons Learned report at Appendix A to enable the board to discuss the recommendations set out in the report and to provide their feedback on the Local Growth Fund programme. The report at Appendix A has been written using the information provided by local areas and through discussions with partners. It gives an overview of the LGF programme, which totals 110 projects, with an investment totaling 578.9 million over the growth build period between 2015 and 2021. Programme governance has been considered, as have the delivery of project outputs and the realisation of project outcomes. The Lessons Learned report includes a series of recommendations for improvements for board members to consider. However, this list is not exhaustive, and board members' views on these or any additional recommendations are welcome. Some of the recommendations concern ongoing delivery of the existing SELEP capital programme, while others are related to potential future capital investment programmes should further government funding become available. To aid the board with their discussion, a series of questions are set out at section 5 of the report. Again, this list is not exhaustive. I won't list those for the moment, if that's all right. Following feedback from the board today, the Lessons Learned report will be updated and presented to the Strategic Board in October, following which an action plan will be prepared as a live document and presented to future Accountability Board meetings, starting with the Accountability Board meeting in November of this year. I think at this point, I'll hand back to Sarah, and you might, hopefully you've seen those questions and would welcome some discussion.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much to the officers who've worked so hard on this report. Really interesting to see. So I hope you've all had a chance to read it and note it. So I suppose there are some key questions that Howard referred to earlier. And I wondered whether we could spend a couple of moments sort of looking at those questions, which is, so one of them is about what have been the most positive elements of the programme for you and your organisation. What could have been done better? And have you had the information that you need to make decisions associated with the programme? And what other support would have been helpful to you in your role on the Accountability Board? What changes would you make to the functions of the Accountability Board to assist in improvements with delivery for future programmes? And what changes can be implemented now to improve the ongoing monitoring of the current programme? So those are some pretty wide-ranging questions, but this is our chance to discuss this now. And then we can also, the next steps are to take it back to the Strategic Board to develop an action plan. So, Councillor Gough.
Chair, not sure if this is quite the moment. I have some very specific points about some of the recommendations, particularly 1 and 2, which I could raise now, or if you wanted to have that wider discussion first, I'm happy to hold back for a moment.
No, raise them now, and then hopefully that will give everybody a chance to think about the questions I've asked. Thank you.
No, I think overall, I think it's a very good piece of work. Very grateful for those who've undertaken it, and I think there's a lot in there. I am, however, a bit concerned about what is put in 1 and 2, particularly 2, actually, which does seem to rather muddy the waters between the respective roles of the Strategic Board and the Accountability Board. And in particular, also, if you look at 2 talks about where a project is significantly delayed with an agreed definition of significant, Strategic Board will be asked to consider whether they still prioritise the project ahead of others in the pipeline. Now, everything I see from the assurance framework says that that is much more the role of Accountability Board to be monitoring projects and to ultimately make any judgments on those. And also, it does raise a question for the local authorities that if they've committed resources to projects, that we could then see, in effect, clawback of those resources the local authorities have committed at that point on the behest of the Strategic Board rather than the Accountability Board. So I think those are my concerns. I'm not also, I did note actually in the report itself, if you get to the sort of summary on page 134 of our papers, and I appreciate this could be read either way, but it talks about in the sort of second paragraph there, recommendations which could be considered, and it says these recommendations include, and there's a whole set of quite sensible things there actually, targeting investment to support outcomes within the recovery and renewal strategy. Doesn't seem to refer in any sense at that point to the governance changes which have been talked about in 1 and 2. So I think this is slightly barking up a questionable tree, and it's also a bit academic in a sense, because from all we know as to what's going to happen with vis-a-vis, and I grant you there are still ongoing projects for which this could be applied, but certainly, what we understand likely to be happening on capital projects in future would suggest that this is a little bit academic anyway. So, as I say, particularly recommendations 1 and 2, I would throw a big query on, particularly number 2.
Thank you, Councillor Gough. We'll come to that, and then I'd also like to remember to answer the other thing about whether this is now redundant given. So I'll come to that in a minute, but Howard, would you like to comment on Councillor Gough's queries on that?
No, I think that's the purpose of the report, really, to sort of almost throw some sort of ideas and recommendations at this board and at Strategic Board, and then sort of come up with a sort of a conclusive overarching summary, probably to this board in November, I guess, after we've got all those bits together. But appreciate the points, and I do understand where you're coming from. I think we'll definitely take it on board, as it were, if that's not.
Thank you, Howard. And can I just ask, sorry, just whilst we're on the assurance framework, perhaps Charlotte, about that point that you raised about the assurance framework sets out quite clearly a process, and this might be seen to be recommending a change to that.
So you're quite right, the assurance framework does say that monitoring and delivery is the accountability board. I just checked it.
Thank you. Councillor Glazier.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a comment really and a question on recommendation 8. Is there any evidence that actually holding back or threat of holding back money would produce a better outcome? I would have thought that in the terms and conditions of most of our grants, all of this stuff would be required. And I can't think that these things don't happen because actually there's nothing there to make them happen, if that makes sense. The fact that you've held back a few pounds, I don't think it would incentivise it. I just wonder if there's any evidence that would suggest that such an incentive would add any value to what we're currently doing.
Thank you, Councillor Glazier. Officers?
Thank you, Councillor Glazier. Yeah, I mean, I think I have to say I thought that recommendation 8 would be the one that was the first one that appeared. So I was quite surprised when 1 and 2 came up. Yes, I mean, we will have to look at this, and I think we would all take on board that point. It's slightly controversial. We have, just so that the board know, you may know, so we did send this out to the members of the SALT group very early on before our programme consideration meeting, and asked those members to have a quick look through it and come back. And this was one of the things that definitely came up very early on. So yes, you know, we are aware that it's, I don't want to particularly use the word controversial, but you know what I mean. There are some questions around it. So yes, take your point. Take your point.
Thank you, Councillor Coxall, and then Councillor Woodley, and then Councillor Wagland. Thank you.
In the spirit of friendship and cooperation.
Thank you.
No, I actually have some sympathy with 8, and maybe I disagree with my colleague, that it does sharpen people's minds to actually keep onto a programme, keep actually where the project is. And it can be interpreted if there's quite a large, at the end of the scheme, and it's money held back. I can understand that maybe if there's a larger percentage of our retention that we've actually delivered it to it. But I think it does sharpen minds, and I think there is examples, especially in the areas where there has been an importance of this board here, and a report to this board has maybe moved a project on at a certain speed that you wouldn't have expected if it was just a local authority run. And I think this board has been an important part, and that's why I do agree with my colleague in Kent that the 2 is, what is the use of this board if we don't start taking it to the other board as well. And I think it worked very well, and I wasn't a full board member then, but I thought how it was here and then both sets of eyes and both boards, and it was a good conversation here, and then at the other board it was much easier. So I thought it worked very well.
Thank you, Councillor Coxall. Councillor Woodley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think one of the lessons learned, of course, is understanding the utility companies and the delays that they can bring in. But when I first came onto this board in 2015, I think everybody was, as you would expect, fighting for the money that was being available and to do this project or that project. And there's a lot of head-to-head situation, but since 19 been on this board, and especially through the pandemic, I think we've learned to be more cooperative, more supportive of one another, of our projects, and we've seen that today on the projects that we've already spoken about. So I think this is a terrific a situation that we've now got the understanding of the projects, the support of those projects, whether it's in Kent or Sussex or Medway, Thurrock or Southend, and Essex, of course, I can't forget Essex. But I think that's that supportive role that we've now given to one another is more important, and we've come together as a team rather than 6 individual like 6 individual unitaries or councils. So I'm pleased at this point the way we support one another. And I think that's a big lesson we've learned.
Thank you, Councillor Woodley. Councillor Wagon.
Sorry, I think that was may have been on in the first place. Of course, it's a little difficult for me to deal with lessons learned on the basis that I'm relatively new to this, but I did go and read some of the previous minutes and then read the report, which I found very interesting, and a lot of it unsurprising. I think I would, I also take on board, of course, the "for all we know" point about what is going to happen as a result of the review. Essex officers I know have contributed their comments separately offline, and many of those have been taken on board in the report that's come out. I think there's an overriding view from those who've been involved with this, that there is a difficulty for the organisation in being able to promote projects which have the potential to be high risk, but are the most transformational. And we think that that is an aspect which we're going to need to be thinking about more going forward, because the building back better, or coming out of the pandemic, or whatever anyone wants to call it, part of what's going on is, I think, going to actually flag up really hard that divide and how you deal with it. And I think we feel that that is subject for debate by both elements of SELEP, and just to work out how it's going to deal with that issue, because otherwise, of course, it becomes easy to do a lot of smaller projects which can be delivered without risk, but inevitably without necessarily having the really transformative effect that I think Essex would very much like to see coming from this board. It's a huge endorsement of what Ron was saying about cooperation and the way in which people behaved, and therefore how it will be delighted to know that the first thing on the note that I got back from officers was about recommendation 8. So yes, that did cut with us, and there was just a feel that it indicated a bit of a lack of trust between SELEP and partners, which was unfortunate. I'm a lawyer, and I'm a disputes lawyer at that, so I have to say that I'm always keen on what we're going to do to enforce anything at any given time. But I do think that it seems to me that the role here, as projects are developing, ought to be one of critical friend before coming into accountability. And I think accountability's part becomes our responsibility to make sure what actually is happening to the money and how it is being addressed. And I think we would feel that if anyone were to be thinking about recommendation 8, it should really be as a last resort, and quite difficult to therefore frame and fit within the governance requirements, because you probably would have wanted accountability looking at it much harder before that. So we weren't terribly comfortable on holding back. That's the long and short of it. But I think in general terms, we felt that it would be particularly helpful to have that discussion about higher risk versus transformation, and that could be something which could be kept on an ongoing basis, because we think that the circumstances as we come out of the pandemic are going to tell us a great deal about that issue and its balance. And if our role remains one of capital allocation at the end of the review, then that's something we would like to come back to and look at as one of the key parts out of this report. So thank you very much for letting me just express that.
No, thank you. Very interesting points. Thank you. Helen, I know you want to come in, and then I've got Councillor Chambers.
Thank you. Just in relation to recommendation 8, this is a measure that is used by other LEPs. So we will engage with them and find out how effective this is. It's not a matter of not trusting local partners. I think it's just because of our experience with the Local Growth Fund, we have had some issues with monitoring and evaluation. I think this is in part because we didn't have a fully established process at the start of the programme. But I think it is something that we will speak to other LEPs about and see how effective it's been. But it is interesting to hear your views on it.
Thank you. Councillor Chambers.
Thank you. Well, I'm the one that I don't think has been given enough clout is the last sentence in recommendation 10, because we have debated in this committee, we've also debated on the board about the impact of government departments and the lack of action by government departments on various projects, particularly Highways England. And I think what we do need to do is we may need to actually spell out the, it does say calculation of the financial impacts on delays and further lobbying of HMG on the impact of delays by other government organisations. I've been involved in regeneration, both in Medway and outside of Medway, for the last 20 years. And each time there's been a hold up, in particularly on significant regeneration projects, it has invariably been one of the government departments. And indeed, there does not seem to be any connectivity between the various government departments on one project or another project. And I think we've gone beyond lobbying. I think we've actually got to, if the government comes up with further growth initiatives or whatever they like to call it, I think that we've got to have, if there's to be a contract with government, there's got to be an understanding and written in that we expect the cooperation from the various government departments, because without that, we're going to be in the same position as we are now.
Thank you, Councillor Chambers. And interestingly enough, it was one of the questions I asked the team when I first read the report was on figure 9 on page 122, which was about the cause of project delays. And I was interested that we've often talked about the impact of DFT or other departments having an impact, and I couldn't see it there, but I've been told that it's under third-party organisations. So if you're reading the report, that's where it is, in case you were wondering. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Coxon.
Yeah, I just come right back on the colleague from Essex. It's I think this only actually mentions really item 2 and the reason for this board. I think we should bring forward risky projects, and I think you've seen today that there's risk projects, high risk projects are coming here regularly, and this is exactly what this board is. So I go back to number 2, if you take away, this is a job of this board of that, and it shouldn't be incumbent, and we should just look at that. It's our job. It may have a terrible risk, high risk RAG rating of its species, but then that is exactly what this board is for, I think, and it's and it shouldn't be in public, because we should actually be informing people, bringing forward risk projects to bring them to here. We're not ashamed, and we're showing today that with the risk projects that come forward, we've given more time, and it actually answers. But in the end, item 8 is an important item for this board as well. But working well with Southend, it maybe in 15 it would be very different. You'd bring less risk projects. In 2015, when it was new here, and we're not working so well. And I do understand them concerns, but I think all them 3 are the reason why we're here today, working well, and we've got the risk projects coming forward. And then there's always this power sitting in this board of item 8 would be very helpful. It may not work if different people are here, and for me, we might be here next year if there's a let review.
Thank you, Councillor Wagner.
Yes, if I may just come back on that, I mean, that's why we were supportive of the cycle project, despite it having produced a number of risks. However, I think you emphasised the risk element of it. And the concern we have is it's not so much about whether projects are less or more risky, it's about whether they have transformational effect. And I think it is that level of ambition, particularly under the current leadership at Essex, where ambition is writ large, that we are concerned that we should look at that. And I think probably an accountability board, it's always going to be starting with risk. That's what accountability as a word tends to steer you gently towards. Our concern is to have something which actually reflects on whether we're getting the balance between risk or non-risk, that element, which is taken as an element on itself, and then what are the transformational effects on this, and how we make that. one of my bosses when I was a lawyer always used to say that it's fine to be willing to take on board the risk, particularly a financial risk, but you need to work out whether what you're doing is a loss and what it's leading to. Otherwise, it's just loss making. And that's not what we're doing. I fully appreciate that, but it articulates for me the element of this, which is the one that we would like to see looked at moving forward towards the transformational balance.
Thank you, Rosemary.
Hopefully this works, yes. I just wanted to just add a comment there from the higher education perspective to support what Councillor Chambers and Councillor Wagland has just said. From our perspective, obviously, we're very interested in the infrastructure outcomes where it enables us to develop skills. And that has a massive impact on point 4 in your recommendations, and we haven't really highlighted that around social value. So the relationship between these infrastructure projects and the levelling up agenda, which is obviously very key at the moment within HMG's agenda, is very strong. And following that value chain through for social value and then into social mobility and relating that to education within the region and understanding what impact the innovation parks, the Edge Innovation Hub, the Construction Skills Centre has is really key. And that plays into that transformational outcomes piece that Councillor Wagland was referring to, because I think what often happens is where the projects and programmes get delayed, we don't necessarily then feed through that whole social value, social outcome piece, and feeding that back to the levelling up agenda and the role of infrastructure in that has become quite key. So from a higher education perspective, that would just be an input on point 4. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. I need to sort of pull this discussion to a close, but I did say when Councillor Gough spoke earlier that I would just refer back to whether this report is indeed redundant or not, given if the LEP review has some impact. I personally think, and I suppose it's a question to the officers really, which is, you know, this report should be useful to everyone, whether or not we're, whether or not we're delivering capital in the future. And I would hope that some of the lessons learned we can pass on to government and to other institutions, whether they be the local authorities or other institutions in the future, and that they would find this report useful. So that's my response to that. Councillor Gough, you raised your hand.
I did indeed. Thank you for that, Chair. I mean, I don't dispute that at all. I think there's a lot in this report that is very, very useful, and it's raised a whole number of the questions that we've debated in terms not simply of the points I raised, but the questions about appetite for risk and transformation, as per what Councillor Wagland just mentioned, etc. My question, incidentally, is what exactly happens now? Because I see the recommendations, it goes on to strategic board, but I just wanted to be clear, because as I think I've indicated earlier on, there's certainly a couple of recommendations here that where if it comes to it, I certainly couldn't support. So I'm just wishing to understand what the process exactly is.
Thank you. Who's going to respond to that, Officer Wise? Helen or Howard?
Okay, so we've brought the report here to receive your comments today. We're also still actively engaging with officers in all the local partners to get their feedback. That will all be fed into an updated report which will be presented to Strategic Board in October. We will then take into account their comments and provide an updated lessons learned report and an accompanying action plan which sets out what we're going to do to take these recommendations forward, and that will be presented to the November Accountability Board for your consideration.
Thank you, that's fine.
Thank you very much. Really useful discussion, really useful report. Thank you, officers, for all your work on it. And thank you to you all as board members for all your really useful comments as well. Okay, so we do not need to do item 12. So we are going to move straight on from that. So we're looking at getting building fund decisions.
Chair, could I possibly ask, just as a procedural matter, would it be possible to have a 3-minute break?
Yes, we can certainly do a 3-minute break. Do you want to do that now before we get on to
I was just thinking exactly that,
okay.
If that was okay with everyone else. Otherwise, I'd have to give my apologies for leaving just from
Yes, okay, with 3-minute break, is that all right? I'm looking over to the technical team, and thank you very much.
I don't see a lot of objection flying around.
Can now move on. I apologise, I have been reminded that I should have read out that we, from the last item, that we noted the next steps to discuss with the strategic board and to develop an action plan for the implementation of changes. So I just needed to note that formally for the minutes. Okay, thank you. Right, let's go now on to the getting building funding, building fund decisions. Kate, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So this report will provide an overall update on the Getting Building One programme, as well as 2 decisions, one regarding establishing SELEP's position on retaining GBF funding against projects beyond the 31st of March 2022, and the other, the preferred course of action for the UTC Maritime and Sustainable Technology Hub project. The board are asked to note that the current forecast for spend in the GBF programme for the 2021-22 financial year is 71.448 million. This is an accurate depiction of the forecasted spend this year based off of the actuals that we have received from authorities for Q4 2020-21. There was further slippage in the spend since the March 2021 Accountability Board. This can be attributed to SELEP not receiving the grant conditions until late September 2020, which caused delays in getting back-to-back agreements in place between authorities and their third-party delivery partners, and the fact that projects have a better understanding of when funding will be spent since the business cases were developed in the summer last year. At the outset of the GBF programme, government stated a requirement for the funding to be fully spent by the 31st of March 2022, and projects were prioritised in part on their ability to deliver in accordance with this time frame. It was originally envisaged that if projects were no longer able to meet this requirement, GBF funding would be returned to SELEP for reallocation through the GBF pipeline. With only 9 months left in the programme, the likelihood of these pipeline projects being delivered by the 31st of March is constantly diminishing as time passes, particularly when taking into consideration the necessary governance processes required when reallocating funding. In light of concerns raised regarding the ability of the UTC Maritime and Sustainable Technology Hub project to complete delivery and spend of the GBF funding by the 31st of March 2022, and taking into account the risks flagged regarding deliverability of projects in the pipeline in accordance with government expectations, there is a need for SELEP to develop a position as to whether GBF spend beyond the 31st of March should be permitted. The board are asked to consider 2 options. Option 1 is that SELEP should reallocate GBF funding which cannot be spent by the 31st of March 2022 to other projects on the GBF pipeline. This would be subject to the strategic board agreeing to flex the order of the pipeline projects to allow projects that can still deliver by the 31st of March to be prioritised for investment. As indicated, reallocation of funding to projects which can deliver by the 31st of March 2022 would be challenging. However, at this stage, there are still projects on the pipeline that have stated that they can meet the deadline for GBF spend and delivery. However, these projects do not necessarily feature at the top of the GBF pipeline, and therefore the ability to reallocate the funding would be dependent on strategic board agreement to allow flexibility in the pipeline, which would need to be sought in summer 2021 via electronic procedure to allow sufficient time for appropriate governance processes to be completed prior to any funding decisions being sought from the board in November 2021. Option 2, as outlined in the report, would be to retain GBF funding against projects after the 31st of March 2022, subject to certain conditions being satisfied. Retaining funding against the existing GBF projects beyond the 31st of March would safeguard delivery of those projects prioritised for investment by the strategic board. However, it should be noted that the consequences of GBF spend extending beyond March are not yet clear. The message from central government remains that spend of GBF funding by the 31st of March 2022 should be a priority. However, there are no clauses within the grant determination letter under which government could claw back funding and claw back any GBF funding not spent by this date. There are potential reputational risks for both SELEP and local partners if the original stated GBF requirements are not met. To ensure that the extension of GBF spend beyond the 31st of March 2022 is only agreed in exceptional circumstances, it is recommended that only projects that have been delayed by external factors which could not have been foreseen at the time of the business case development will be considered for retention of GBF beyond March 2022, with the maximum extension offered to a GBF project being 6 months up to the 30th of September 2022. This is proposed in light of the original government expectations, and the purpose of the GBF funding stream was to play a key role in supporting economic recovery post-COVID-19. It is also recommended that projects seeking an extension demonstrate compliance with 6 conditions set out within the board report, which cover provision of a clear delivery plan, confirmation that all funding sources required are to deliver the project are in place, all planning requirements are met by the 31st of March 31st of December 2021, construction contractor appointment by the 31st of January 2022, and confirmation that the total project costs and benefits remain unchanged with endorsement of the strategic board. Based on the experience of managing the tail end of the local growth fund programme, it is recommended that the board choose option 2, noting that this mechanism is only intended to be used in exceptional circumstances and that the vast majority of GBF projects remain on track to complete spend of the GBF funding in advance of the 31st of March 2022. It is recommended that the criteria and conditions outlined above are rigidly enforced to ensure that delivery of the GBF programme is completed by the 30th of September 2022 at the latest, to ensure that SELEP's GBF programme is in the position to play a key role in local economic recovery post-COVID-19. The second decision outlined in the report seeks to establish the preferred course of action in regards to the UTC Maritime and Sustainable Technology Hub project. Due to delays caused by unforeseen and complex land ownership matters, the project is now reporting that it is very unlikely that their GBF allocation will be spent in full by the 31st of March 2022, and therefore a position needs to be established regarding whether there is any scope of the GBF funding to be retained against the project beyond this point. The board are asked to consider 2 options with regards to the project, which are in line with the options considered by the board under the first decision. Option 1 is that the board agree that the project is removed from the GBF programme and the full GBF award of 1.3 million is reallocated to the next project or projects on the GBF pipeline, which are still able to deliver by the 31st of March 2022. There was previous comments regarding the GBF pipeline and the need for strategic board to agree to allow flexibility to be able to prioritise projects that can ensure delivery by the 31st of March need to be taken into consideration with regard to option 1. Option 2, which is recommended subject to the decision taken by the board on SELEP's position on GBF funding being retained against projects post March 2022, is to allow project until the September 2021 board meeting to demonstrate that they meet the criteria and conditions for retaining the GBF allocation beyond March 2022. It has been noted that once the land ownership issues have been addressed, that the scheme promoter remains confident the project can be delivered as per the original outputs and outcomes, just to a revised timetable. The decision taken by the board with regard to the UTC Maritime and Sustainable Technology Hub project should align with the previous decision taken to ensure consistency across the GBF programme. Now open for any context. I'll hand you back to Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Glazier.
Thanks, Chairman. Again, a very thorough introduction, a very thorough report. As you would not expect me to do anything more, I would support option 2 in both of these occasions. And I have confidence that if the conditions can't be met, it will still give us time to deliver the outcomes that we require.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Wagner.
Yes, we would likewise support option 2 in all cases, and note that there are 2 ECC projects, just by way of example, on Appendix C, and both of those are caught in the planning or approval decisions where they are due fairly shortly, and we all have experience of those and the external reasons that have driven them, but obviously that would be subject to meeting the specified criteria. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Coxall.
Yeah, can I ask, obviously, it's like my previous one, when we run past certain dates, and in the last few years we can kick the can certain amounts and understand there's sort of tight restrictions, and it's always about reputational risk, isn't it? The central government can't take it back, but they can't give us any more. How many other LEPs is this happening at this, and I can understand this exceptional circumstances are having this issue, and how much reputational risk, considering we're in the middle of a LEP review, this is always concerns me that we, and can they do that? And what can happen next for another tranche in the next year if we do come out this the other side of this LEP review?
Thank you, Helen. Kate, let's take that. Suzanne, please do. You might need to find a microphone, please. Thank you.
We have the most GBF, so this affects us more than other LEPs, but other LEPs are also having delays. The timing on the GBF was so short that there was bound to be delays. And so I think reputationally, currently our reputation with government on delivery of capital programme is really good. And we've heard that from them on a number of occasions, that they've been very pleased with the delivery that we've had, and they do understand that these are complex projects, and it's a large, even the GBF on its own 85 million, it's a large programme and there will be slippage. So I think from an officer's point of view, we feel fairly okay with the reputational risk as it stands.
Thank you.
Was there anything else you wanted to add, Helen? Sorry,
Thank you, Councillor Wagland.
It may also be worth just mentioning that this for development projects is now also an experience within the private sector, of course, who have similar issues, but in relation to their forms of funding. And it has progressively become something on which a degree of flexibility, sensibly constrained, is much better understood in the light of the circumstances, particularly that we're facing. But we would agree with Mark that that's not something that we want to become a feature of how we do business. And I don't understand from these reports that we are doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like us to note the current forecast spend for the GBF programme for 2021-22 financial year of 71.448 million. And we are offered two options, and given that there's been no one speaking in support of option one at the moment, I'm going to suggest we take a vote first on option two. So it is agree SELEP's position on retaining GBF funding against projects beyond 31st of March 2022. Choosing option two, do we agree with retained GBF funding against projects after the 31st of March 2022, subject to certain conditions being satisfied as detailed in 6.9.3 of this report? So do you agree with that? Okay, thank you. And agreed the preferred course of action for the UTC Maritime and Sustainable Technology Hub project dependent upon the decision, which was option two, to allow the project until September 2021 board meeting to demonstrate the compliance with the criteria and conditions for retaining the GBF allocation beyond the 31st of March 2022. Do you agree with that option? Okay, thank you. Okay, sorry.
Apologies for just raising something which links into this item after we've taken the vote, but I wasn't quite sure which elements we were taking when. I'm perfectly happy with the two decisions we've taken. I just had a slight query about some of the bits, in particular section 7 of the report, which is really around what happens if a project, probably particularly in relation to the UTC project, did fall foul of these, the conditions we've just agreed, wasn't able to be delivered, and what priority we then give to other projects, because I think there's some discussion of, okay, it would be very difficult to do something as late as November, and do we apply some degree of flexibility to the batting order that we previously gave for GBF projects? Now, what I would say is certainly in relation to, I mean, there are two projects which are straight there in terms of the priority, which is the Princess Alexandra in Harlow, which obviously I know very little about, and the Amelia Scott in Tunbridge Wells, which I do know rather more about. And I do know that that is something which could, for instance, act on spending the money if that issue arose as late as November. So I'm just seeking a bit of assurance that if the situation does arise that money becomes available, that we do work off still what the priority order that we established is, subject to clearly deliverability, rather than I think some of the wording seems to suggest that, and it says in 7.7, these two projects are there, but it would be awfully hard to deliver them from November. Well, as I say, I can't speak for Princess Alexandra, but certainly for Amelia Scott, that would not be the case. It could be delivered from November. So it was just to ask, firstly, whether there's any scope for bringing any of those forward to Accountability Board, simply to be have their business cases assessed. And secondly, can we, if the situation arises, stick to the batting order that we'd established, subject then to deliverability, rather than simply throwing the whole thing, if you like, up in the air.
Thank you, Councillor Gough.
Yes, so the only proposal to reorder the project pipeline was if the board chose to enforce the 31st of March 2022 deadline for spend. As you have agreed flexibility on that in line with the conditions outlined in the report, we would be looking, subject to projects still being able to deliver, to stick with the order of the pipeline as originally agreed.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the Getting Building Fund decisions. So Kate, I'm very conscious of time, and I know that Councillor Glazier has to leave exactly at 12, so I'd just like to note that for others. I apologise that we're overrunning slightly. Sorry, Councillor Glazier. Chambers and Councillor Glazier. Sorry, that's why I was looking confused. Okay, thank you, Kate. So can I ask officers to be succinct as possible, please? Thank you.
This report is to consider the award of 1.019 million to the Innovation Park Medway Sustainable City and Sustainable City of Business and the Access in Charleston, removing the barrier to growth projects, which are seeking £778,333 and £240,542 respectively. The Getting Building, subject to government approval, of inclusion in the GBF programme. Government is aware of these projects. We are just awaiting confirmation and we are chasing them, just so that you guys are aware. Both projects were at the top of the GBF pipeline and were agreed by the Strategic Board in March 2021 to be able to present at this board for consideration to approve the projects to receive the remaining unallocated GBF funding. The Charleston Access Road project is asking for an extension to the 89,293 GBF funding previously approved at the November 2020 Accountability Board. GBF investment into Innovation Park, the Innovation Park Medway project, will enable the delivery of one section of the Runway Park site and will be used to deliver pavements, footpaths, planting, street furniture and preparatory groundworks to support the site in bringing together businesses and individuals to maximise job creation, generate productivity gains in Medway and increase the number of businesses in the area. This is additional to the other projects that have received SELEP funding from the LGF and Growing Places Fund programmes, and the benefits are separate from these projects. An LDO has now been adopted by Medway Council and Tonbridge and Morning Borough Council, which means that although there is not currently planning permission in place, this will be on a self-certification basis that takes 28 days, and the GBF element of the self-certification application was submitted the week commencing the 14th of June 2021. Therefore, any remaining risk remains low. The other risk to the full that the full benefits of the site is not realised if businesses do not choose to build their premises on the Innovation Park Medway site. No contracts have currently been agreed with businesses, although it should be noted that significant interest has been expressed in the site, with 20 companies making serious inquiries. The Charleston Access Road project, previously stated at the November 2020 Accountability Board, when approved, their original funding allocation that the full range of planned works and intended benefits would not be realised through that initial funding award. The additional funding was sought through the GBF pipeline process to enable completion of the wider package of works, including an additional scope of a 1 kilometre cycle route and the full completion of the upgrade of the access road. I will now pass over to Steve at Steer, who is representing the...
Just due to time, I'm going to suggest that we don't hand over to Steve at this moment. The report is very detailed unless board members would like to. No, okay, thank you. So can I take the board, was there anything else you wanted to add, Kate? Thank you very much. So any comments or queries on this report? We are going to add the line subject to government approval of project inclusion within the GBF programme to those two items we're being asked to agree. I will read it out in full in a moment, but just so you know. Any comments? Okay, so do we agree the award of 778,323 GBF to the Innovation Park Medway Sustainable City of Business project, which has been assessed as presenting high value for money with high/medium certainty of achieving this, subject to government approval of the project inclusion within the GBF programme? Do you agree? Can I see your hands, please? Thank you. Agree the award of the additional £240,542 GBF to the Accessing Charleston, removing the barrier to growth project, which has been assessed as presenting high value for money with low/medium certainty of achieving this, subject to government approval of the project inclusion within the GBF programme. This funding is an extension to the funding previously approved at the November 2020 board meeting. Do you agree? Thank you very much. Okay, let's move swiftly over to Helen, who's going to provide a report on the GPF fund programme.
Yes, so as usual, this report sets out the latest position on the GPF programme. I'm just going to pick up on the points that relate to the recommendations within the report. So obviously the report outlines a number of projects which are considered to be high risk. Two that are specifically referenced are the Colchester Northern Gateway project and the Centre for Advanced Engineering. It's noted in the report that there were significant delays completing the required legal agreements for the Colchester Northern Gateway project, which has resulted in a delay to the drawdown of the funding. The board are therefore asked to note the change to the drawdown schedule, as previously it was agreed that the funding would be fully drawn down in 2020-21. The report does also highlight some risks, presumed risks around the repayment of the funding allocated to that project, and also there's uncertainty regarding whether the remaining 650,000 GPF allocated to the project is required. Since the publication of the board papers, we have received an update on the project, and they have confirmed that the 650k allocated to the project is no longer required and will be returned subject to a formal decision taken by the board in September. We have also been advised that the 1.35 million already drawn down against the project will be repaid in March 2022, as previously agreed, and therefore there have been some changes to the recommendations within the report. On the Centre for Advanced Engineering project, the board were made aware of a risk to the repayment schedule at the last board meeting. There are ongoing discussions between Essex County Council and South Essex College to reach agreement on a proposed alternative repayment schedule, and that will be brought forward for the September board. Finally, the report asks for consideration of proposed revised repayment schedule for the Eastbourne Fisherman's Quay and Infrastructure Development Project. This revised repayment schedule has come forward purely to manage a cash flow issue. There is no risk to the repayment of the GPF funding. It's purely switching the repayments scheduled for 21-22 and 22-23 to ensure there is sufficient cash flow available to support the build of phase 2 of the project.
Thank you. So any queries or comments? So just for clarification, we are no longer noting the 2.1.3 on the report. So we are asked to note the updated position on the GPF programme. We are asked whether we approve the revised repayment schedule for Eastbourne Fisherman's Quay and Infrastructure Development Project, and agree that despite repayments not being made in line with the original repayment schedule, no interest will be charged on the loan. Do you approve that? Thank you. Note the change to the drawdown schedule for the Colchester Northern Gateway project, and note the ongoing identified risks to the repayment schedule for the Centre for Advanced Engineering project. Thank you. Okay, so item 16, Helen, I'm handing over to you for that. It's the funding decision.
Yes, thank you. So the purpose of this report is to allow the board to consider the award of a further 1.6165 million to the Observer Building project. The Observer Building has been empty for 35 years and has become increasingly derelict. The project seeks to transform the building and bring it back into highly productive use. The project has previously been awarded 1.75 million from the Growing Places Fund and 1.713 million from the Getting Building Fund. To date, none of the GPF funding has been repaid as the project is still in delivery. It was originally intended that the GPF allocation awarded previously would help support the development of the lower levels of the building, as well as some structural works. The award of the GBF funding allowed the scope to be expanded to include the full redevelopment of the lower 4 floors of the building. Procurement of the contract has been completed, but due to the impacts of COVID-19 and Brexit, tender costs received have been higher than expected. Despite extensive value engineering process, there remains a funding shortfall which will be addressed through this additional GPF funding. The additional funding will also enable completion of further works, including external shell works and internal works on the upper floors, which will create the conditions needed to support an application to the Homes England Affordable Homes Programme to unlock the remaining funding required for the residential element. The project has been assessed by Steer as offering high value for money with high certainty of achieving this.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Councillor Glazier.
Chairman, I don't want to add to the length of the meeting, but it would be rude of me not to say how important this is to the centre of Hastings. It really is moving on now, and this will just help to finish off the final bit. So if members are happy to support, I would be very appreciative.
Okay, thank you. So do you approve the award of 1.615 million GPF by way of a loan to support the delivery of the Observer Building project as set out in Appendix C, which has been assessed as offering high value for money with high certainty of achieving this? Thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to hand over to Suzanne to provide a report on the operation. Suzanne, thank you.
Thank you. I will make this quick. There aren't any decisions required for this report either, which is good because our quorum is balanced on a knife edge. We won't be discussing today the proposed changes to the assurance framework around the terms for board members, as there was a delay agreed at the last strategic board as to how succession planning will be managed. So that's one thing that we don't need to consider today. Just quickly draw your attention to the outcome of the annual performance review. Obviously, as accountability board, that's a key point for you, and we did get the highest marks there that we could. So we were pleased with that. And we've also received a good rating on the internal audit review that Essex County Council conducted recently. The main thrust of the update kind of harks back to the beginning of the meeting, really, and it is concerned with the risks around the LEP review. We flagged them. I think board members are aware of them. There are delays to the LEP review. I'm on one of the working groups, on the accountability working group, actually, and that group has met and had some discussions, but we haven't had full guidance yet from officials. It's clear that officials have been pulled off to work on other things. I think as Councillor Wagland was saying earlier about what is the blocker, and it does seem to be that officials have been diverted elsewhere. We have flagged the risks and we continue to manage them. Are there any comments or questions on the report?
Again, I think that the report is really covers all of the points, and well done to everyone that's pulled it together. I think the uncertainty is not helpful to any of us, least of all the staff that have to live with this day in, day out. And I think on behalf of the board here, we just need to acknowledge the pressure that puts them under. So thank you.
Absolutely. And just, I mean, I'd like to just add my thanks and congratulations to the team for achieving that really good score, and also for dealing with all of this uncertainty. You know, the words of there's no certainty apart from uncertainty read true at the moment. But thank you to all of the staff. And I think we would all want to offer our continued support to the staff in any way that we can. So, Councillor Woodley, did you want to come in? Okay, thank you. So I'd like us to note the outcome of the annual performance review and the Essex County Council internal audit review of SELEP and the accountable body processes. The report can be seen in Appendix A. Note the update on assurance framework compliance monitoring on at Appendix B, and governance KPIs at Appendix C. Note the changes to the risk register at Appendix D. Thank you. So there's one other bit of any other business that I'd like to raise. Is there anything else that anybody else wants to raise? No, what I wanted to say was a big thank you to Kate, who will be leaving us sadly in August, and to thank her hugely for all of the help and the support and the brilliant work on the getting the building fund organised and sorted out. Thank you very much. You're going on to get a new post with central government. So you never know, we might see you in another guise one day. Thank you. Is there any other business? Nope. So the date of the next meeting is the 10th of September 2021. We don't have any other urgent business. And now we have a confidential item. Suzanne, you're going to handle the dealing of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, so we're just dealing with, so we are going to